and we'll go quickly through what we've already talked about, and then we'll pick up where we left off. So I'm not going to read the entire passage again. I think you're pretty familiar with it now. So we'll move down a little bit. Oh, what the heck? I will. So after this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat down with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that the large cloud was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said to them, he said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each to have a little piece. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There is a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now there was much grass in that place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, prayed, he distributed them to those who were seated, so also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, that nothing may be lost." So they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had eaten. When the people saw the sign that he had done, Jesus had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." Perceiving then that they were about to come and to take him by force and to make him king, Jesus withdrew again from the mountain by himself. So we saw all of these things, and we just read that, so we're going to move forward. So the feeding of the 5,000 I mentioned to you yesterday is the only miracle of Jesus that is recorded in all 4 Gospels, and that alone makes it notable. But we'll talk about more other reasons why it was notable. And the first the first 2 words is "after this," which means some time has elapsed. We don't know how much time. As much as a year, but it could be as little as a month or 2. We just don't know. So let's talk about the importance of the miracle. Why was this so important? Why was this important enough for each of the gospel writers to include it in their gospel? And this is the only thing that Jesus did, miracle, that they all did write about. So why was that so important? The first thing is that it was performed before so many people, 5,000 people, actually probably more like 12, maybe 15,000 people witnessed this miracle. So that alone makes it notable. And then it's also a miracle of creation. He wasn't taking something already there and restoring it. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? Right? The blind people see, and the deaf hear, and the lame walk. It's all great, but they already had legs, and they already had eyes, and they already had ears. He wasn't creating something new. He was healing something that was there. In this case, he was making something out of nothing. And only God can do that. God made something out of nothing when he created the universe. By the way, you'll find out next year, that isn't just what the Bible says. That's what the science says. That's what the math says. That's what the logic says. That there was nothing before creation. And so it was a miracle of creation. Only God can do that. It is a picture of Christ, a picture of who he is. He is the bread of life. He is the one, and that's in a coming up chapter. He is the only one that can give us eternal life. The bread satisfied for a time. But Jesus satisfies us for forever. Oh, and the occasion of the miracle, it was during a time of rest. I don't think that's very notable, but it says it, so I said it. And then we talked about lessons from Christ's vacation. That is just not even worth moving forward with. So let's talk about, they call it the failure of Philip and Andrew. I'm just going to call it what Jesus said to Philip and Andrew. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough for each of them to have a little. One of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, but what are they for so many?" So we talked about this yesterday, that why did Jesus say that if he knew what he was going to do? Why did he ask them for the answer, for the solution, when he already knew the solution? It doesn't make sense, right? But he was doing that to test their faith. And I like better to grow their faith. And isn't it true, as we walk with Christ, he reveals more and more and more of who he is to us. The longer you walk with Christ, the more you learn about him, the closer you grow to him. I've probably told you this story before, but I'm going to tell it again if I have, and if I haven't, then you're hearing it for the first time. This was back, so more than 5 years ago now. This was back when we were at La Platte, and we had an administration meeting. The superintendent, the president, not the president, the principal, and the guidance counselor. And I knew that Mrs. Schrag had come from a tour with a family, and she was a little late because of that. And so she came in, and I asked how her tour was. And she said, "Oh, it's good. They won't come this year, but they'll come next year." And I said, "Oh, did they tell you that?" "No, they didn't tell me that. God did." And that was it. And I was like, okay, well, I know about Mrs. Schrock to trust her. I don't know. And then the next year, the next school year, here comes this family. She said we'd go. And I looked at Mr. Hood and I said, "How does she do that?" And he said, "She just walked so closely with God." I'm convinced that the better someone knows Mrs. Schrock, the more amazed are at how closely she walks with God. And God has tested her faith. And God has grown her faith. But you have to be cooperative with God. God gives us free will. He doesn't force us to love him. He doesn't force us to follow him. He doesn't force us to obey him. But the really wonderful thing is as we walk with him, as we obey him, we become more and more like him. You hang out, you come alike the people you hang out with, isn't that right? Sometimes you even start sounding alike. Sometimes you start saying the exact same words, the exact same catchwords, because you're hanging out with each other so much. And the more, the closer we get to Jesus, the more we become like him. So this really grew the faith of the disciples, and I'm not going to worry about that next part because that's not important. So then it also reveals Christ's sovereignty. What's sovereignty? What does that mean? What word equals the word sovereign? King Charles III is the sovereign of England. He's king. And so sovereignty is basically complete power and complete understanding. So Jesus was omniscient, and only God, he knew everything. Only God is omniscient. And so he wasn't really worrying about where the bread was going to come from. He knew. He was just growing the faith of Philip and Andrew. And we see Christ's sovereignty and his knowledge in verse 6, where it says, lifting up his eyes and seeing the large crowd and coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread so these people may eat? He said this to test them, for he already knew what he was doing. He wasn't worried. He didn't need their help. He didn't need their advice. He already knew. But Jesus wanted Philip to know who he was, to know him, who Jesus was. It also requires man's obedience. Jesus could have done it on his own. The fun thing is that he allowed them to take part in what he was doing. And guess what? He still does that. He gives us the opportunity to partner with him in ministry. And I think that's part of why the times, at least for me, and I hope for you, the times that are most meaningful, the times that are most important, the times that most change my life is when God's doing something and he's allowed me to take part. That's why I love camp so much. Because God's presence is so thick. And I know that what I'm doing causes God to smile. And so when we obey, things go better. Just obey. It goes better when we obey. When we disobey, it goes badly for us. When we obey, that's the times when we feel fulfilled and important and having purpose. And if you're lacking that, just let me give you some advice. Partner with Jesus and do what he's asking you to do. You won't feel that way anymore. Now, the last one is it shows God's orderliness, but apparently not his manliness. I don't know. That one's not very important. God is a God of order. I mean, he created the universe, and you're going to find this out again next year, how fine-tuned the universe is. But that's not the most important. Yes, he is orderly, but that's not the most important. And then reveals Christ's omnipotence, that he is God, that everything belongs to him. And Jesus is able to use the smallest things, the most insignificant things, for his purposes. Think about Moses, baby Moses in the basket on the Nile. And the tears of a little baby touched the heart of Pharaoh's daughter. And the people of Israel were saved because of that one baby. Think of David's sling. It's a little sling, right? My sons played with when they were little. He killed a giant with that little sling. God delights in using things that other people don't think are important. For example, using you, using me, including us in his plan, in his purposes. We are frail human beings, but God treasures us and desires us to partner with him in his ministry. And then it shows the blessings that come from serving. The curriculum says that the disciples were each rewarded for after the feeding of the 5,000 with their own basket of food. The Bible does not tell us that, and so I don't know if that's true. But what I do know is true is that it is for us It is a privilege to join with Jesus in what he's doing. Whatever that is, it's a privilege. I think that's why mission trips can be so powerful, and I know it's why we make every student take one every year because of that. And then it reveals Christ's sufficiency. There's a saying in our culture that I really dislike, and it's this: "You are enough." No, you're not. You're not. I'm not. Nobody is, except Jesus. Jesus is enough, but I'm not. And it's meant to make us have this self-importance. But our job isn't to be self-important. Our job is to point people to Jesus, right? Not to make everybody think we're so powerful and so wonderful. We're to lift Jesus up. So we have two feedings in the Gospels. One is the feeding of the 5,000 that we just talked about, and then the other is the feeding of the 4,000. So we're going to compare and contrast these two feedings. So the feeding of the 5,000 is in each of the Gospels: Matthew 14, Mark 6, Luke 9, John 6. And in each of the feedings, there's a basket. And in the feeding of the 5,000, it was a kophinos, which was a larger basket without a handle. I think it was without a handle. Maybe it was. Anyway, that was a basket that the Jews used. And there were 2 fish and 5 loaves, and there were 12 baskets remaining. The feeding of the 4,000 is recorded in Matthew 15 and Mark 8, but not in Luke and John. And you can see this, this one had the handle. It was smaller, it was called a spurus, and this was used by Gentiles. And the Jewish basket and the Gentile basket is important here. So there were a few, it didn't number the fish, a few fish and 7 loaves, and then 7 baskets remaining. Now here's where the curriculum talks about that there were 12 tribes of Israel, and that's true, and there were 12 baskets left over. But then they say that there were 7 Gentile nations at that time, and that's what this is related to. I've never heard that anywhere else. It could be true, but I've never heard that anywhere else about the 7 Gentile nations. All I know is it's important because Jesus did it, and he did it for a reason. And he is the Savior of the whole world. So if it is saying Jews and Gentiles both, then I'd be on board for that, because Jesus came to be the Savior of the world. Now, we're going to turn to the next part of this chapter of Jesus walking on water. And we'll see how much of this we can get done before the end of the hour. We might be able to do that. Okay, so here's the story. When the people saw the sign that he had done, meaning Jesus had done the feeding of the 5,000, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who is to come into the world." Perceiving that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. When evening came, his disciples went down to the sea, got into the boat, and started across the sea to Capernaum. It was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. The sea became rough because a strong wind was blowing. When they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat, and they were frightened. But he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. So the disciples here are in trouble. And they are on their way to Capernaum. So this is the west side, and Capernaum is on the, they're saying, well, I'm not going to talk about it. So Capernaum is on the other side. So they have to go across the lake, the Sea of Galilee, to get to Capernaum. And a storm came up. And that was not, and it still is not uncommon for storms to arise quickly on the Sea of Galilee. So this fissure, I'm not sure if that's because of earthquakes or what, but it exists, and there you see on the west side, there you see the Sea of Galilee below. And the wind goes through that cavern, and it whips through there. And so that then goes down to the Sea of Galilee, which is what causes a lot of the waves and the wind that we're talking about in this particular story. And even today, say the Sea of Galilee is known for its violent, fast-moving storms. So within hours of one of the greatest blessings they had seen from Jesus, the disciples are faced with a dark test. That's true for us sometimes too. Things are going along, they're great, we're fine, we have a good relationship with Jesus, we have good friends, and then something happens. And we don't understand why. Remember that whatever that is, it's there to test your faith. I'm not saying God did that only for that, but it is an opportunity for you to grow your faith. So just keep on growing during those times. But I want to talk about this story a little bit more. So, but he said to them, "It is I, do not be afraid." Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. Does anybody remember, and if somebody does remember, I don't really have candy right now, but I think I have a low pop back there. Nobody in the first hour knew this. Does anybody remember what I said was God's self-revelatory name, the name that God gave for himself? Okay, so we'll talk about it. So, what was the first thing? You can read this. This is easy. What is the first thing that Jesus said to them when he was walking toward the boat and saw that they were scared? What did he say? He said, "It is I." He said, "It is I." Okay? It is I. In the Greek, it's ego eimi. And translated into the Hebrew is this. Anyone know that name? Yahweh. What does it mean? Here's what it means. I am. Remember Moses in front of the burning bush? And he's arguing with God, which is a really stupid thing to do. God always wins. I don't know why we don't understand that, but he's arguing with God because God's just told him to go back to Egypt where they tried to kill him and set his people free. And he is telling God all the reasons why he shouldn't have to do that, or he can't do that. And God just keeps coming back. And Moses keeps coming back with excuses, and finally he gives God this excuse. Well, okay, let's say I do this. They're going to want to know who sent me. So what's your name? Who is it that's sending me? And God said, "I am that I am. Tell them I am sent you. Everywhere that you look in the Old Testament, if you see the word Lord, it can be done two ways. This one, that's the abbreviation of Yahweh, is Yahweh, I am. This one might be Adonai, it might be any number of other things that mean God, but this is the most holy name of God. This is God's self-revelatory name. It is the name he gave himself. When he was asked his name, he said, I am. And so the Jews are not supposed to write the name of God. In fact, when I was at Miller North, I wish I could remember her name. I had a Jewish student in my world religions class. And whenever she had to write down or type out the name God, she did this. Because God's name, I probably should do this. Because God's name was too holy to be written down. When Jesus says, it is I, he's saying, I am. He's saying, I am God. Once again, I remind you of my professor who said, nowhere did Jesus claim to be God. Yes, he did. This is probably the 6th or 7th time that I pointed out to you that Jesus is claiming to be God. So, did Christ know about the disciples' problem? Did he know that would happen? Did he know it was going to happen? Yes. Did he know it was happening? Yes. To all of those things. Of course he did. He knows all of our problems too. But he arranges everything for our good and for his glory. And sometimes you don't realize that until you're looking back at the story. But you will understand that if you look back at the story. And when we look back and see through the eyes of Jesus, we see that every trial that we face, he has said to us, don't be afraid. It is I. I can testify to what C.S. Lewis says. He says, God whispers in our pleasures, but he shouts in our pain. It is his megaphone to rouse a deaf world. Now, when he shouts, he's not saying, you idiot. He's saying, it is I. I'm here. I won't leave you. And he, oftentimes we don't hear him, but it is usually when we turn to him in those dark times where we hear him the best. And so probably the best lesson we could take away from this is to trust and obey. I love the old hymn, trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust him. And when we do that, things go better for us. So that's it for this lecture.